Lovely. Okay, well, a very, very warm welcome to this, the second in our micro webinar series. So, a very warm welcome to you, and thank you for joining us. Um, the webinar series itself is organised as part of the Embrace project, which is a Horizon Europe initiative working to strengthen Europe's preparedness and response to biological and toxin-related threats. The project brings together a strong consortium of research institutions, operational agencies, and innovation partners to try to improve how Europe detects, assesses, and responds to emerging biotox risks. Central element of the project is its aim to connect experts, knowledge, operational practice, get people talking about it in the biotoxin community. And through this, Embrace tries to support practitioners, researchers, and policymakers by improving their access to each other and to trusted information. So we're hoping to strengthen collaboration in that way. Within that sits the new European Biotoxin Task Force, or BTF as we affectionately call it. And the BTF is the host of this series. The Toxin Task Force brings together a small group of independent experts, and they've got a deep experience across areas like toxicology, public health, environmental monitoring, crisis management, and civil protection. So it has three main roles. The first one to be to provide a rapid, informed support during emerging biotoxin crises. So it's a single point of contact, both for the Commission and for other stakeholders to know who they can ask. The second one is that it's going to be looking into the future to prepare strategic preparedness guidance and also to do a future scan of what are the emerging issues around biotoxin risk assessment, response operations, and capability development. The third role for the task force is to give professional advice to the project itself, the Embrace Biotox Hub project. So that's its third role. Today's webinar is part of that broader effort to sort of get the dialogue going, share insights, and talk amongst ourselves about key issues that are of interest to CBRN and biotoxin professionals. So a final explanation from me is that we're going to run an informal chat between David Crouch, Professor David Crouch, who I'll hand over to any moment now, and his expert guest today, Brian Tate, for no more than 30 minutes. So we'll have a chat for 25 to 30 minutes. Then we'll turn the debate over to you and we'll seek observations and questions from you initially through the chat. So don't be shy, just type into the chat as you feel. We'll be moderating it behind the scenes and we'll plug it into the speakers as we can. And we'll also invite you then to come online if you wish to comment or ask them directly. So thank you very much again for joining us. I look forward to the discussion ahead, and it's over to you, David.
Thanks, John. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are. So, as John said, I'm David Crouch. For my day job, I work at the Defence Academy in the United Kingdom, working for Cranfield University, where I run their CBRN education programme. I'm also a member of the Resilience Advisor Network, and as John has mentioned, I'm the chair of the Biotoxin Task Force. And it's my great pleasure today to introduce Brian Tate, who is the Group Product Regulatory Approvals Manager for Resprex. And I hope Brian won't mind me saying, but Resprex are one of the world's leading companies in PPE for chemical spillages as well as biological materials and radiological materials. So Brian's expertise, not just in product development, but also international standards development, is first rate. I can't think of a more suitable candidate to talk about today's topic, which is very much around standards development in the space of biotoxins. We had Julia Kirscher yesterday from the Medical University of Graz talking about PPE requirements for biotoxins. And that video is now on YouTube for those that are interested in watching yesterday's video again. But again, yesterday we were talking about biotoxin PPE requirements, and because biotoxins sit between different camps, they're actually chemically derived, but they're derived from biological species. So from an international convention and mitigation perspective, they almost sit in a grey area. And often one of the challenges is very much around how can standards keep up with modern day requirements. So I'll briefly pass over to Brian just to let him introduce himself and his background a little bit more, and then we'll start the questions that we have narrated for the first 25 minutes, and then we'll very much open the floor to questions from the delegates. So Brian, over to you for a quick introduction.
Thanks very much, Dave. I'm Brian Tate, as Dave said. But yes, I am responsible for all products at Respirex for their certification. We also look at, I've been tasked with looking at the performance over the standards across which our products are certified to, and also have on various technical committees with BSI, which is our UK notified body or approved body, but also a notified body through another country within the EU. But we help CEN and ISO look at standards, and I give my expertise on the CBRN's technical committee for PH33, and also I chair the horizontal committee for personal protective equipment, which is PH23, which is the UK contribution to JTC 23 for Europe.
Thanks, Brian. So yesterday we talked about where biotoxins derive from. Obviously, they are chemical toxins, but they are
Yes.
biologically derived. So,
Yeah.
from a standards perspective, how does existing standards distinguish between infectious biological agents and highly potent but non-infectious biotoxins?
Very good question, because there isn't any standard. Well, to the best of my knowledge, our development on the PPE side of things, we don't differentiate between a synthetic toxin and a biotoxin. What we do specifically is look at the rate of permeation through a garment fabric. If we're only talking about permeation, we are not respiratory is slightly separate with regards to chemical exposure, but we treat it as a chemical, and how that is then determined with regards to the risk that is given to the PPE, or at least the risk mitigation, is the size of the molecule. So what we have is on a broader spectrum, and actually, Dave, what I also have to do is answer the question why. Why do we need standards in order to address these topics? Because it's really important. And I know we've got lots of experts, and maybe some actually have a better opinion on standards than others, or favorable one than others. But first thing, what we have is the infectious agents, which is how the standard specifically 14126 talks about, which is say a bacterium or a virus, and then we have the chemical protection, which is usually the best standard in Europe. That is EN 943-2, which is for emergency teams. When we talk about standards, we are only going to be speaking about the European side of the standard. There are American standards which largely come from the ISO side of things, which is where you can also think of European standards basing themselves on the ISO standards that have been written. But looking at Europe as a whole, Europe is governed by this PPE regulation, which is 2016-425, which is derived from the PPE directive, which was first published in 1989. It is Europe, I would say, in my personal humble opinion, that has set the benchmark for what a personal protective equipment is. You would think that personal protective equipment is pretty much standard, in the sense that if it protects you, that's good, and anything can be a protective equipment in one sense, but it is actually much more specific in how you measure the risk mitigation from whatever you're trying to develop in keeping one safe. And the PPE regulation is really good at focusing the mind of the reader and also the PPE developer in what they should concentrate on in not only technically protecting the wearer, but also qualitatively, how is that going to be maintained, that protection? So, so that is the first key point I would like to raise, is that when you're writing a standard for any type of PPE in Europe, you have to first go back to the regulation and make sure that all the technical aspects of the standard that you are writing comply with the regulation. So that's, you've got all in one, you've got legal compliance and technical compliance. Then when to come back to your question with regards to toxins, it will be classified as a chemical risk because it is not a biological risk as such. And so therefore, you'll have to use chemical protective standards. The standards are written with regards to the smallest molecule that can possibly be, well, not possibly, but what they do is they select a broad range of spectrum of chemicals with, and the smallest of each class is then put in the standard to be able to then test your garment or clothing or seam against that specific chemical, and you have a very good base level of how protective your clothing will be, because you're never quite sure of what risk you are going to be encountering when you're wearing, specifically an emergency team personnel. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does, and that beautifully leads us into our second question, because
Mm,
you've mentioned kind of the end user, so the responder. Uh,
yes,
so when we consider all the different tasks that responders have to do, whether they're a fireman, a police officer, ambulatory, or other
yes.
government official, and here
Mhm,
we may be talking about sampling, decontamination, law enforcement type operations.
oh,
What type of tasks? How do the
mhm,
responder tasks influence PPE requirements? And here I'm looking at the
mm,
context of biotoxin protection.
mm,
So when you're designing new
mhm,
PPE, again,
mhm,
if you were designing from first principles something for purely for biotoxin
yes.
protection, what tasks are mainly you're thinking about from influencing the design perspective?
Okay. Wow. So I would think particularly it would be low volume. So so when we are looking at say a chemical spill, that is a different type of risk to say a biotoxin, which could be anything from a a tourist attraction issue, whereby an animal or plant of some sort has released some type of toxin that could be dangerous to either tourist or worker within the zoological area, or it could be a terrorist attack. So again, you would want to make sure that the respiratory, which 12941 is a good start with regards to respiratory, because it'll be mobile respiratory protection. It'll be for powered air. There is also mask protection, but you would want to have chemical um, filtration with regards to that. Um, and then gloves. So I'm just trying to. The problem, David, is that you have so you have risks, biotoxins, which is a whole spectrum of chemical, not only lethality but also molecule size. So you have to be able to determine that any testing that you do on your PPE will cater for a broad range of molecule um, uh, what you call it, penetration. So this, in principle or rule of thumb, if you can test your PPE against the smallest molecule uh, that is, and it can pass the standard, or at least reach a high classification, then you're in a very good position with regards to your design criteria. The other thing is the lethality of the molecule. So you might have a very small molecule that can be resisted, but we always find permeation is almost a given with regards to chemicals on garments, and the key is to understand how poisonous the chemical is. So you'll hear me say chemical a lot, and you coming from biotoxin, so you'll keep saying biotoxin, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But for me as a designer of PPE, I'll have to always think about the chemical, not so, which could easily be the case that it could be a mixture of biosynthetic and biotoxin chemical risk. So, and it's not taken away from your subject and point is to say that um, um, biotoxins are chemicals. So therefore, what you're looking at is you're looking at one, how big is the molecule to your garment that you're wearing, and will it be able to penetrate or permeate, because there's a difference in the definition, through the garment. And secondly, when it does permeate through, how much of it will it need to collect on the wearer's skin before it becomes lethal. And usually, well, what we have is very good PPE with regards to the permeation resistance, but there are not that I know of, but we do have to consider, and there is a standard for understanding how poisonous the risk will be until there is a detrimental to the wearer. And so that is something that we have to keep in mind. And so when we are talking about, and I think the standards are going to get to that point whereby when you're classifying your PPE, you want to sure the permeation is really resistance. The permeation resistance is really good, but then when there is say what is it where the outlier, there's an outlier chemical that can be extremely toxic, then a separate level of classification is needed for it, just to make sure that the PPE that is being designed will not will protect the wearer. So any type of permeation that gets in will be not lethal to the wearer, or at least hurt the wearer.
Okay. So in light of what you've just said, here will often feedback from customers is around kind of use employment of the PPE rather than its kind of more materials characterization. So should certification bodies adopt more of a scenario-based testing approach rather than a purely materials-based assessment? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so scenario-based testing can limit the conversation with regards to how good the PPE is in on the market. So what you have is you do have practical performance, is what the standards call it, whereby the wearer will be wearing a fully, not in a risky environment, mind you. It will be a practical performance of how the suit, or in my mind, it's the suit, and we're talking complete isolation of the wearer in the environment because it's a first responder. We're not quite sure so invariably it will be a suit. The practical performance will be about comfort and fit, and that any type of movement in the of the wearer in the suit will not compromise the integrity of the suit. So therefore, it won't create a hole, or any bits of the assemblages of PPE, say for gloves, example, will fall off readily. So there is an attempt to address the topic of situational testing for PPE. But I think there might certainly be more need of technical experts to have an opinion on standards in order to, if there are any gaps in the drafting of PPE with regards to that specific question, standard bodies, standard bodies would be very interested into hearing from the technical expert, and that can be done pretty easily by seeing who the writers of the standards were, as in technical committee, and then reaching out to that technical committee specifically in order to address the issue. I hope
Yeah,
that answers your question. Is that
it
right?
does. It does, and
Mm.
because quite a few people have in the past have expressed the desire for scenario-based testing. I think my view is a compromise between the pure materials-based characterization assessment and the scenario-based. And this, for me, is where the US started this with NFPA 1990 ensemble standards. And
Hmm.
obviously now in Europe, we've got JTC 23. I
Hmm.
think it's now, rather than testing, say, a respirator in isolation or a suit in isolation, I think for me, the big drive forwards in this space in standardization has been to look at ensemble standards where you're testing all of the personal protective equipment together so that it meets the end user's requirements.
We have that with regards to in a small way with our total inward leakage
Yes.
type of work in the nuclear sector, but
Yep.
that's particulate. We have also brought in the SF6, which is sulfur hexafluoride atmosphere testing, which is to demonstrate seam integrity with regards to chemical permeation coming in.
Yep.
The problem is, and I wanted to put this out to your listeners, is that the laboratories are in short supply. As in, we don't have many technical experts to be able to analyze PPE, high spec PPE like CBRN and chemical protective particularly.
Yep.
And so not only the test labs, but the certification bodies are quite limited. So it is a bottleneck to the market with regards to this. Not to mention cost as well, which is also because when you're developing such a robust high-end sort of protective equipment, the costs before the PPE is on the shelf, the costs go into the tens of thousands
Yeah.
in just the compliance alone. And we're not talking about sourcing materials, etc. That's a different cost.
Yeah, which I guess that drives us to kind of we've just got time for a couple more questions.
Sure.
And I think that drives a really important question. And the question is, how can European agencies, industry, and responders communities collaborate more effectively to drive standardization? But I guess this goes beyond Europe. This is a global requirement as well, not just within Europe, although Europe is very much a leader in kind of standardization. So I welcome your thoughts on how can agencies, industry, and kind of the responder communities collaborate more effectively, in your opinion?
Okay, so emphasis is on the leadership here with regards to Europe. I would even say that we lead the United States in that. Although the United States would say that they have drafted their own standards, which is true, but as I said before, it is largely taken from the ISO standards that have been drafted, and they have a very strong opinion about, as in a favorable opinion on the EN versions of PPE standards. So, and then on top of that, customers around the world will ask for European certified PPE, or to a smaller extent, American certified, which is the NIOSH and the NFPA side of things. So your question with regards to getting more technical experts involved and how could they be part of the system is it it is tricky because it's not funded, as in you won't get paid, but you do have a level of contact with professionals from other industries. Well, maybe industries certainly, but definitely from other sectors that use PPE. I say industries because I do talk to people in the electronics side of industry. So I speak to people on the standards that are building EMC particularly, and all types of professionals in the drafting of electronic standards and also fabric standards. So there is a sense of professional development, and I think it would be a willingness to want to put yourself out there in the standards world, confidence. You'll need to have confidence in order to meet with people who are working with standards, which is in a profession in and of itself. So there is a lot of jargon and way that that standards work that you'll have to um, familiarize yourself with. Like, what's the difference between a published standard and a harmonized standard? That was one of the first questions I tried to answer myself, because no one else really was helpful in answering that for me. And I think the first way to go about it is professional bodies. So we're talking your union or your uh, professional, whatever your professional body, what you could identify as, and then speak to them about how they are liaising with people in the standards community, because they invariably will be, because they would want to have their staff or their uh, members conform to a specific standard, and then reaching out directly to the standard writers, like I said before, through the technical committees. And then what you would do is that you would send your a brief CV of why you think that you could contribute to the standard, and then it will be taken from there, and you'll be drafted in. Is that helpful, David?
That's very helpful, and that very much helps set the scene for our final question of
Good.
our fireside chat. And again, often the criticism of standards is they're slow to respond because of
Yes.
their cycle time.
Hmm.
I don't personally buy into that, because standards are there as our benchmark, as our guideline for society. So,
Mm.
from an innovation perspective, whether that's new materials, kind of filtration technologies, smart personal protective equipment,
Hmm.
what innovations, in your opinion, should future standards begin to incorporate? So I'm going to use the
Oh,
Embrace project as an example. So one of the discussions that we had within Embrace at the very beginning is where, as an entity, we are looking at new detection for biotoxins.
yes.
There is no European norm. There is no international standard for biotoxin detection in terms of
No.
a standardized methodology. So
Yeah.
again, a lot of the work that is being done, there is a standards gap. So from
Yeah.
your opinion, what are the innovations that are happening that you think should be kind of more in that the standards community should start to look at, or
Yeah.
possibly involve? And here I'm very conscious that often people think, well, you should just include everything in a standard. But if you make it too prescriptive, then it
Yes.
doesn't allow manufacturers kind of latitude to innovate, shall we say.
Sure. Yes. Okay. So um, it's an interesting question, because standards are written particularly for safety. You want, and it's not safety from the risk that the PPE is protecting of, which is the end part of the standard. The other part is to make sure that um, the 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 wearer is safe from the PPE itself, so to speak. So there is a little bit of that with regards to making sure the materials that are sourced are correct, and are REACH compliant, for example, um, and it, so to look at, in a sense, going forward and to see what will be on the horizon with regards to PPE. So what I'm trying to say is, first, that although standards are ever evolving, they are not, you can't be immediately responsive to standards generally, because so much thinking has to go into the development of the concepts that the standard is trying to communicate. So you see a need. It's not going to take, it's not going to be completed in 6 months with regards to this need, but being on with the standard gives you the opportunity to thrash out how exactly this need is going to be addressed using the law, which is the PPE regulation, to be a very good uh, boundaries on how you are going to develop your personal protective equipment. Okay, so then you have, as you say, you've got your sensors involved. Will sensors be good for PPE? Maybe with regards to threat detection, but then the question is, what happens if the detection is not is at a higher level than the PPE can offer? So that's an interesting question. I think one of the aspects of PPE is to have sensors to talk about, well, to tell the wearer how much they are at risk with regards to heat stroke, with regards to internal leakage of any type of toxins that are coming in. Keeping the wearer informed of their safety will be a key driver with regards to artificial intelligence and electronics within the PPE design, which is actually been taking place. It's actually happening. We are, as in with the JTC 23, and what I'm doing with PH23, we are getting together a team of people within the electronic textile industry, as well as looking at the sustainability of fabrics and materials for personal protective equipment. So there are moves towards bringing personal protective equipment up to a much higher level of what you call it, detection, so to speak,
Yeah.
and safety.
And there's been a driver from the nuclear industry, slightly different but analogous from the nuclear industry for that. I'll call it telemetry for want of a better phrase, where total inward leakage. So you're looking for, are there any failures in the PPE that could prevent kind of exposure to the hazard? Similar principles apply to biotoxins.
Yes.
Brian, thank you so much for your time. That concludes our discussion, but I've seen, John, that there's been some discussion in the chat, so very happy to take questions from the floor if there are any. I've seen that
Yeah,
Stefan's
excellent.
asked a question.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I've had a rather clumsy approach to what I understood the was being said, but Stefan, I would very much like you to ask your question directly. I think there's two components to it. One is about the conversation or the discussion that took place around, I think it was talking about particulates and solids as opposed to vapors and gases. And that was a question around permeability. And the second one was about the sufficiency of a specific protective suits standard. Stefan, would you like to ask your question directly, my friend?
Yeah, why not? Hello. Thank you,
Hi.
Brian, for the excellent introduction into the topic.
Thanks.
My question is basically, if I understood you correctly, you would go for the highest level chemical protection when dealing with biotoxins. And I'm wondering, we are dealing with particles, while chemical filters, for example, are usually used to protect against vapors and gases. And
Yes.
same for the suits, protective suits of 943/2 that you mentioned
Yes.
would be
Yes.
gas tight. So wouldn't EN 14605 be sufficient for particles?
EN 146014605. So that's a chemical protective clothing.
Exactly.
Particularly, yeah, particularly
Type 3 and 4, yeah.
that's correct. So particles is particularly a respiratory risk. Obviously, you want to make sure that you don't have particles within any open wounds or ocular uh, contact. So yes, okay, excuse me. Yes is the quick answer in one sense. There is a necessary need for risk assessment from your side. Um, there is the type 5 classification, which talks about particles for chemical protective suits, which is kind of like a dumbed down nuclear protection. They don't have classes with it. They usually talk about total
Yeah,
protection factor. Um,
that would just as a quick feeling, that would feel a little bit too risky for me. So I would stick with 3 or 4.
yes. Yeah, okay. But the question is then, how do you protect your respiratory? So
Yeah.
I'm
um,
I'm I'm happy to answer that because
Okay.
that was kind of what I did at 3M and Scott. So again, as long as you've got a combination filter with a minimum of a P3 particulate membrane in there with a gas and vapor cartridge, you should be okay with most biotoxins. However, with any form of PPE in any incident, as you know, Stefan, it comes back to what is your tolerable risk. What risk are you prepared to accept? And often when I was at Scott Safety and 3M, we had, whether they're military customer, first responder customer, some would just say, yes, we'll stick a standard ABEC 3 filter because that's good enough. However, other customers would say, well, we want to actually test this filter against ricin or SEB. And that's where it becomes really, really problematical because Brian already mentioned there's only really Picares now in Europe, if not the world, that actually does this type of testing. And even if we consider this CBRN testing, biotoxin testing is even more niche and exotic than standard, say, BS8468 canister testing. So again, it's a niche of a niche of a niche. You can argue, is there actually a requirement for this because it's so specialized? But actually, the only ultimate way to prove to the end user is to actually test against those materials, which is, and again, to Brian's point on the suit side, the natural assumption of the manufacturer is to assume that a biotoxin is a chemical, which if it's a marine biotoxin, it could be quite oily in nature as a material, not necessarily particulate. So again, if it's oily in nature with a lot of fatty groups attached to it because it's a larger molecule, potentially it will absorb into PPE much more readily. So again, you've got a bigger contamination risk, decontamination, etc. So ultimately, the long way around of what I'm trying to say is often if the customer is really concerned, they will ask for that kind of testing. But again, it depends how deep their pockets are.
Thank you.
Okay,
Just on,
Dave. Oh, sorry, Brian, go on quickly.
no, I was just going to say, you mentioned Procaras. Procaras actually have now brought their testing down to only the Schedule 1 warfare agent testing,
Yep.
which is really problematic when you have Schedules 2 and 3 that no other test houses in the world actually test towards them. So I'm thinking of hydrogen cyanide and cyanogen chloride, for example, which
Yep.
is a real problem. And I would like a test house to be able to find a test house that'll be able to test these chemicals, but at the moment we don't have that. So
And again, this it's and to Stefan's question,
yeah,
whether it's respiratory protection or PPE
yeah,
in terms of suits, boots, and gloves, the
yeah.
challenge is not just testing. You could find an academic lab that would test for you. It's testing to that certified, notified body level.
That's another problem. Yes,
Yes,
it
which
is.
would again testing to the relevant level to so that you can have, for want of a better phrase, your test report to show that you meet that standard.
Yeah, yeah. Usually the notified bodies are quite helpful if you tell them that you're the only ones in the world that do it, because there are people in the
Yeah,
notified bodies that that's their day job. They look at the normal little face mask, etc., and then you come with this highly complex question that you ask about certifying this CBRN, and then they start umming and ahhing, and then you tell them that this is what you have. The problem then is cost, because you talk about academics being able to test it. That's great. We were able to find a test lab that was able to do hydrogen cyanide and cyanogen chloride. The problem is that the cost was exorbitant. So we went back to our customer, who was a government, and we said, do it yourself, because there's no one on the market that will do it for us, and they
yeah.
appreciated that.
No,
Mm.
no, that's fantastic. Are there any more questions, John?
No, I think we've got a request for some more information about heat stress from Sebastian, but we'll take that offline if that's all right, Brian, and see if there's
Sure.
anything we can send to him after the meeting.
So,
Okay. Yeah, fine, no problem.
from my perspective, just two things. Firstly, to thank Brian for such for firstly for giving up his time,
No problem.
and secondly for giving such an insightful discussion. And the second thing is, as chair of the BTF, so we're putting webinars on literally every month throughout the year on different subjects. Now we are picking the subjects that are relevant to the BTF and to the Embrace project. However, we're trying to build a community of practice here around biotoxins. So if any of the audience, or you've got colleagues who are interested in biotoxin research and would like to speak about their research or their relevance to biotoxin mitigation and incident management, we are more than happy to take suggestions on new ideas for other webinars so that we can keep the series going, we can keep the message around the need for biotoxin research and mitigation. So with that, I'm happy to close there, John, unless you've got anything else left to say.
Excellent. Yeah, I'll just wrap it up if that's all right, Dave. So just a massive thank you to everyone. I've got a confession to make insofar as we've had a massive clash of joining instructions because we had two back to back with very similar. So I'm aware, because my phone hasn't stopped during this presentation, that a lot of people have been trying to join that couldn't. The reaction we'll do to that is obviously when they run a month apart, that will cease to be a problem. But more importantly, the email of this event, the video of this event will get out within the next hour so that people that haven't managed to attend can at least hear the discussion straight away. So it remains for me then to say a massive thank you to our host, Dave Crouch. Thank you very much as chair of the BTF. To Brian for a remarkably strong insight.
Thank you, sir.
What's going on, not only the current state of PPE standards, but I think you've also given us a feel for what might be possible in the future.
Yes.
This has been the second micro webinar, and the next one's scheduled for the end of April, as Dave says. So we'll get information out of that. We're going to follow up today with an email to everyone that registered with advice, exactly as Dave says, how to become involved with the BTF if you choose, providing the videos from the last 2 days, and seeking your feedback on other subjects that you might like discussed or debated with us on these micro webinars. So that'd be brilliant. We'll try to get hold of Europe's top authorities, and I do count you as one, Brian, very much on these issues, and we'll invite them to speak to us. Finally, Katerina has put the links to all of the Embrace Project's media channels in the chat. Thank you, Katerina. You'll see it on your screen at the moment as well. So please have a look at these and sign up to the newsletter. So with no further delay, I'm going to stop the recording. And with that, wish you an enjoyable rest of your day and the weekend. And thank you very much for your involvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody.